Welcome to another exciting episode of Shy Hack Night, number 398. Our special guest tonight is John Sweeney, who's joining us live from Belarus, where it is 2 o'clock in the morning. Before we get going, for the new folks, I'm going to explain how all this works. So we have a Slack where we're going to do a lot of communications. So if you want to check that out, go to slackme.shyhacknight.org. That is slackme.shyhacknight.org, and that'll get you set up with an account. Folks in there are going to be doing introductions and having a little bit of socializing and whatnot while we go through the announcements. And then after the presentation, we're going to meet back there for a breakout group. And I think tonight we may have a very special breakout group with our presenter, but more details about that later. So let's see. I'm going to go through our announcements real quick. Hooray! So our website is shyhacknight.org if you haven't seen it. And all right, yeah. And the big announcement is Shy Hack Night is now a 501c3. That's right. We are a not-for-profit. This is huge. It took a lot of effort and a lot of time to put in to get this done. And we're very excited that we are now a full-fledged, real nonprofit. Oh, and joining me is Katie O'Shea, our Shy Hack Night board secretary. What else we got, Katie?
Hi. Okay, so can we go to the next slide? Talking to our slide master. Perfect. Okay, so May 26th, we're going to have a member meeting. In case you are not a member of Shy Hack Night, you can find the information about how to become a member, what it means to be a member, all on our website. But yeah, so member meetings are a chance for us to talk about the various decisions that have to be made for the organization and to get a chance for members to weigh in. All right, on to the next slide.
All right, and June 2nd is a very special Shy Hack Night. It is episode number 400. 8 years of Shy Hack Night. That's right. So we're collecting testimonials from speakers, Shy Hack Night alumni, members. Celebrity appearances are welcome. And we were trying to get folks to shoot a 30-second or less video. Tell us about Hack Night. Did you work on a project, make a new friend, land a job, just come for the empanadas and leave? That's fine. So tell us about it in a 30-second or less video. You can put it on YouTube, Instagram, Vimeo, whatever else is out there, and we're going to put them together and share them on the 2nd of June. So that link is bit.ly/CHN-400.
Alrighty. So the next two slides are all about the census. I don't know whether you've filled yours out already, but it is super important to do so. And if you want a little bit more information about response rates, you can find it at the link here. Unfortunately, not clickable, but we can provide it in the YouTube comments. But yes, super important, fill out the census. That's all I've got to say about that.
Yeah. And let's see, we got one more announcement here. Some folks at Hack Night are trying a little experiment. We want to be the tech and help desk for the city of Chicago and all of the lovely not-for-profit organizations and other types of groups within it. To help us test this out, if you know someone who needs some tech or data help, send them to bit.ly/CHN-help-desk. And this is probably easier to find on the Hack Night Twitter or one of the other social media channels, and it'll be in the Slack also. And if you're interested in volunteering and have skills in either tech or data, why don't you drop us a line at bit.ly/chin-help-desk-volunteer. All right. I believe that is it for the announcements. So now give me a nice virtual round of applause. Is that a thing? For our tonight's presenter. His resume is like a game of Carmen Sandiego. It's like Philippines and Hawaii and Belarus and Kazakhstan. And John is the director of the Kazakh Research Institute of Future Studies. John's really into futures and foresight. But I think the first time I met him was during the Chicago polar vortex when he did not have the foresight to bring a coat. So take it with a grain of salt. But without further ado, I give you John Sweeney.
Thanks so much, Joel, and thanks to everyone at the Shy Hack Night team, Josh and Katie, for the invitation and the opportunity to come and to connect with this group. I have to say that even though I was born in New York, please don't hold that against me. In the last 10 years, especially, I've been able to spend a lot of time in Chicago and I've fallen in love with the place and the people. And Joel became, just a good guy to hang out with, and really always appreciated his collegiality and friendship over the years. I'm bummed out that I missed on the empanadas. I really wish that there was an opportunity to have a virtual empanada, but I'm going to try to soldier on as best as I can. So for me, it was really timely when Joel, when we started this conversation about doing something, because I just concluded some research. And of course, right now, and this is what I tell my father, is that unfortunately for a futurist, what's happening means a lot of job security, because a lot of people are just freaked out. There's lots of uncertainty. And of course, we're living in a time where not a lot of stuff makes sense, but we all want to know and try to understand the future in some meaningful way. And a lot of my work is helping to facilitate processes to explore the future. And as I'll talk more about later, not to predict the future, and why that difference is important. So this is really built on, again, research I've been doing over the past few years with some amazing people all around the world. And I'll talk a little about sort of why I ended up in Kazakhstan as we kind of go. But just to give a sense of what is the framing in the next sort of 10 to 12 minutes to talk about. Basically, how to do and how to think about and what does it mean to engage in participatory futures during a pandemic. And I thought that was really relevant, of course, because now we all had our sense of the future disrupted. It feels like we have just like jumped timelines, and maybe it's felt that way over the past few years, especially. But I wanted to start off by kind of asking you to think a little bit about and reflect on kind of your sense of the future. And I wanted to give you 4 options for kind of what I was talking about. So maybe when you think about the future, or your sense of the future is that you're riding on a train. You feel like you've got your ticket, you've got your destination, the tracks are laid, for better or worse, and that's where things are going, and you kind of know where things are headed. Or maybe you feel as if you're kayaking down the river and there's a certain flow to things. Of course, you have your paddle. You can choose to speed up. You can choose to try to slow down. You can even choose to go against the current if you want. That's totally up to you. But there's certainly a kind of a trajectory to where things are headed. Or maybe you feel like that you're sailing on the sea, and that you can pick your destination, you pick up your crew, you can go where you want to go. And of course, life on the high seas is very unpredictable. There's storms, there's pirates, who knows what could happen. So that's sort of where you're there out in the open, and you want to get where you want to go. Or maybe you feel as if the future is that, look, you're just rolling dice in a game of chance, that you could hedge your bets, but at any given moment, at any given opportunity, who knows what could come up, right? Snake eyes could ruin your day, but who knows? Yeah. So initially we talked about doing a poll, but that didn't seem to make a lot of sense. But just internally, kind of think about where you are, kind of as a gut check, right? Now, my guess is most of us feel like with what's happening that we're probably rolling dice in a game of chance. Certainly, if you're going outside without a mask on, you might feel that way. But I often use this as an icebreaker exercise for online and in-person engagements, because it starts a conversation, or really it starts us thinking about how we think about the future. And I say that because we think about the future all the time, of course. We do a variety of things, both consciously and unconsciously, explicitly and implicitly, that really guide what we want to see the future to be. And of course, we take actions every day, again, whether direct or indirect, to kind of create the future that we want. But we often don't reflect on why it is that we're thinking something about the future. If we think something is more likely or more plausible or more probable or more preposterous or even, impossible, why is that? So my job is really to kind of get in there in the people's headspace, but also to pull out seeds of potential futures, pull them out and to try to bring them into the present so people can engage them. And that's where the hacking imagination piece comes in. This exercise was actually envisioned by and put together by a guy, Draper Kaufman, who thought it was a really interesting way to get people to start to think and reflect on the kind of assumptions we have about the future. And a lot of that comes through story and metaphor and narrative. And as we'll see, that comes out through games as well. So typically it's said that on the one side, it's the future is more dominated by chance if you selected that, and that you think the future is more decided if you're picking the riding on the train. But as we see now, of course, things are pretty topsy-turvy. And actually, I often use the example of in India, trains get lost all the time. And if you notice that specific train, it's actually the train from Harry Potter. So even a train, if you have your ticket and you think you know where you're going, any potential disruption is possible. So oftentimes it is about challenging the assumptions that people have about the future. Now, of course, I think one of the biggest assumptions that we all had was that, okay, we're going to have this crisis and we can rely on government to do some kind of a good, decent job. And I'm living in a variety of places where that is clearly not the case. So Belarus has been sort of held up as the poster child in some ways for, criticized for what not to do. Hasn't been a lot of mitigation measures. Everything has been open fundamentally. You can go outside. They did close some clubs. There was a problem in one city, but the president's been going on televisions telling people to drink vodka, go to saunas, and ride on tractors. And that is not at all me being flippant with my words. That's literally what he told people to do. So clearly we see that the virus itself is just one of the crises that we're facing. It's misinformation, it's disinformation, lack of trust in government. How do we understand and make sense of these kinds of challenges? And of course, what that means is that fundamentally it's raising a variety of issues at the core of civil society itself. Certainly, this can be seen as an accelerant on a variety of existing trends and issues across different societies. And again, as an American, clearly it's bringing to the fore lots of these, fundamental political questions and issues that aren't going to go away unless we actually bring in, I think, a long-term perspective to that. So this is how I explain to my father what I do. I say, look, I'm not a prophet. I'm not in the job of predicting the future. I actually don't even do a lot of forecasting necessarily. My job fundamentally is to work with organizations to help pick out possibilities from the future, to hack imagination so we can actually put in windows where there are walls. And from an organizational perspective, that means seeing things from a different perspective, seeing out maybe where we weren't seeing before. So trying to think a little bit further afield. But also when you put a window into a wall, it lets light in. So reflecting inside the organization, what needs to change internally, a system, a process, a structure, and again, that is that sort of internal, external balance that's really critical to a lot of the work that I do. So I always show this slide because I've heard a crystal ball joke in the 45 every one of the 45 countries that I've worked in. Futures and futurists is not really about prediction. You will find people out there doing that, and good luck to them. But I think as the last few months have shown, it is really hard to make predictions, especially about the future. And I can't recall if that was Mark Twain or Yogi Berra, but equally fantastic American poets. And again, a really important point for the kind of work that we do. So again, in the last 10 years, I've had a really phenomenal opportunity to work with lots of really interesting organizations all over the world. And the core aspect in different organizations, different projects is to kind of stoke the fires internally and to use futures and foresight and use that as a real gateway to try to create change within the organization. Now that change can be in leadership, it can be in operations, it can be in strategy, but really to try to fundamentally create new and different ways of taking advantage of the uncommon opportunities, but also meeting the challenges that we think will lie ahead. Now, this is all great on paper and practice, and this is widely done in corporate space and civil society. But why is it hard to think about the future? Well, it turns out actually that our brains, when they are engaged in thinking about the future, or when in this particular study, when they were asked about the future, the parts of our brains that light up are the parts associated with episodic memory. And so this is actual, neuroscientists like digging into this kind of question. And so what this fundamentally means is it's actually a validation of something that a variety of futurists have been saying for decades, which is to say that we actually walk backwards into the future. Oftentimes the expectations, the assumptions that we have about what might lie ahead is simply built on the kinds of assumptions that we have and the experiences that we have in the past. Now, maybe that gave us an evolutionary advantage of a species, right, to have some semblance of memory, to build in the capacity for culture and to spread things over time. But it also means that we tend to normalize things, and we tend to oftentimes discount, let's say, an outlier event or something that could potentially have a big impact and disrupt everything. Similar like what we saw happen to a variety of responses to the pandemic, even people denying it while it was actually happening because it didn't fit their mental model. And so that's really critical to a lot of the work that we do. My particular interest over the last 10 years especially has been, how do we engage people to think about the future in productive ways? So participatory futures is kind of an umbrella term for what that looks like. I was really fortunate last year with the help of NESTA, who commissioned the research, to do a global scan and to try to find out what are the best cases of organizations, governments, people, maybe a bunch of yahoos got together and said, we want to talk to people and think about the future and deal with particular topics and issues. So this group came together called the Action Foresight Global Swarm. It was the best name we could think of, and it was 9 people in 7 different countries, 7 different countries, doing this research, trying to find the best possible cases. And I'll just give you a quick taste of some of what we discovered. One really cool example was in Mexico City, when they were looking to revision the Constitution. And they realized fundamentally that there has been not just a lack of political autonomy, but people feeling like they actually don't even have any means to have a voice in any political process. So there was a large constitutional reform process. Essentially, there was a laboratory there that was fundamentally looking at different methods and modes to engage people. So they had online petitions, they were doing door knocking, they had surveys. And they had a really interesting system where fundamentally, if the particular issue had a certain level of engagement, then it automatically moved on to the next stage. So this kind of graduated petition system allowed them to make sure fundamentally that anything that was seen as being critical within the community would move further into the process. And that actually allowed some really amazing things to be added to the Constitution. So essentially rights, women's rights, there were all kinds of rights additions for LGBTQ, dealing even like elderly, animals, a diversity of issues. So again, a really amazing example of just getting out and talking to people, again, in a very low-tech analog way, but also using, just the really simple, available kind of low-hanging fruit tools to do that. Another example I really like, a really cool colleague ran this project. This was called Early Days of a Better Nation. It was an immersive theater experience. So again, a pretty significant investment to put this show together, to run it. Of course, it's limited by the number of people in the room, but a really in-depth, really fantastic, immersive, experiential way to actually engage with this possibility space for what does this fictional post-collapse state look like, and how do you make decisions? And so the whole event is run as kind of a pretense for how can you actually think about reimagining political context. And this was a UK base, so very relevant to obviously discussions around Brexit. But it reached hundreds of citizens across the UK, and the kind of consistent narrative was people left feeling empowered. And that's actually what the organizers wanted. They wanted people to feel like they had the opportunity to engage in political processes and have a voice in those processes. One project that is tech-based that I really like, and I got a chance to work on this and to help run this project when I was working at the International Red Cross Red Crescent. This was a partnership with Newcastle University's Open Lab, one of the top HCI labs, human-computer interaction labs in the world. And they came up with this idea of, what if we actually played a game with people on WhatsApp? And so we made the game about the future of the Red Cross Red Crescent. And this was really at the start of what ended up being almost a 1.5 to 2-year strategy development process. So I was helping them kind of just kickstart their foresight work. And it allowed us to talk to thousands of people that otherwise wouldn't have been able to be engaged. Of course, on the back end, it meant all kinds of data. I mean, it just meant thousands and thousands of messages, hundreds of audio and video, but really amazing, rich, local, really deep content about what people were thinking and feeling about the organization's future. And also it gave us a really interesting map of how they were seeing the future, obviously from their particular context. And then one of the another really cool example put together by MIT. Of course, we're hearing lots of issues and concerns about self-driving cars, and there's the kind of classic trolley problem. Who do you kill, right? If the machine has to make a decision? Well, they put this into a game and launched it online. And Moral Machine is still available. You can actually go still play. And it basically tracks and looks at the decisions that you make. Do you kill the family, or do you kill the elderly people, or do you kill yourself, or do you kill the pedestrians? And apparently 40 million people in 10 languages from all over the world played this game. And what they found was some interesting differences according to the kind of moral values in relation to culture. So again, a real validation for the importance of context and culture and values, but also a really phenomenal engagement piece for helping people think about this critical issue. And of course, it's not just about self-driving cars, but a variety of forms of automation, whether we're talking about high frequency trading or automated defense systems. Like a really interesting conversation around trust, around how do we begin to engage with these systems and processes, and how do we make sure that people still remain part of that process if we want that to be the case. I'm not going to talk about NESTA, but a really amazing place for the sake of time. So all of that led to a report, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? You write these giant reports. And Jeff Mulgan, the former CEO of NESTA, I thought raised a really good point in the report. He said, look, like if we don't actually try to work towards the future, then we're just going to be trapped in this eternal present. And that's a real sort of swirling, chaotic thing where you can't actually feel like you get where you want to go. So I put a link into a report there. Super interested in your questions. And I did want to mention that because we fundamentally wanted to just not make it a report, we built a game. So there's a game based on the report. I would love to play the game if anyone's interested. So I've just joined the Slack. We could do it on Miro. There's a link that's available for that. And that way you can actually see some of the ideas and actually generate it as well. So thanks again, everyone. If you have questions, please fire them off, and then I'll be definitely hanging out, although it's going to be 3 in the morning pretty soon. But yeah, would love to play the game if possible. So thanks so much. And yeah, we'll leave it here for questions.
All right, thanks again. Yeah, that's great. So let's see. Are there other examples similar to Mexico where there was a broad participation that went into a political process that was able to change law or policy somewhere?
Yeah, so I didn't talk about the No Suruba one. That one's really interesting because that was sort of like national level, right? And then we actually found about 400 cases from all over the world of different kinds of participatory futures engagements, and all of them had different kinds of impacts. So some of them were very community level. Some of them were actually like exactly what you're saying, like national policy level, where they were trying to engage people and think about the future. We had also too like. Now there's museums of the future, different games, online engagements. So we found like a broad swath. In the report, we only cataloged about like I think 3 dozen or so. But I think actually there has been an increase in recent years of governments, and certainly that's been driven a lot by international agencies. So some of my work has been with like UN agencies of trying to push more innovative participatory means to do that. So the No Suruba one is actually interesting because there was a change in government in the middle of it. And then actually people said, no, well, that doesn't matter. Let's keep going. And actually a lot of times if there's any kind of disruption to those kinds of processes, they fall apart. So that one's a really good example. There's another example. And again, it really varies widely. So there was a city in Poland called Plock, and they wanted to think about how to change mobility within the city. So they ran some online engagements, and they actually completely reoriented, like bike lanes and everything else in relation to that based on that engagement. So again, it really totally varies, but yeah, there are different examples of that. And I'm happy to share. I can share some more of those as well as we go on. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Let's see. How wide are the uses of this type of participatory imagining?
Yeah, so right now, I'll get on my sort of soapbox for a moment. We're living in the golden age of scenarios, right? You can't go online without seeing scenarios about the future, right? What is the new normal? What is the the post-COVID, right? Like there's tons and tons of stuff out there. And what I'm seeing is a lot of people are just kind of like scratching them together and like throwing them out there. And of course, there have been some engagements, but I think actually, even though participatory futures has been growing, I think in scope and scale, and it has become more widely used. And so, governments are talking about it. You have some governments having like sort of a position that functions almost as like a minister for future generations. Within the context of the current crisis, I think actually there's so much of the kind of feeling of being at the edge of chaos or over the edge of chaos, that actually some of the participatory stuff is being lost. So I think actually, since, and it's different in different places, of course, but at least with some of the people I'm talking to, kind of the first wave is sunsetting a bit. So now they're realizing, okay, we have to do better at engaging with people. So some of them are coming back and saying, all right, we want to now find ways to do these participatory engagements. Whereas in the last few months, it was the sky is falling, the sky is falling. So we just, need to hold the, hold the ship together. But I think in general, in the last few years, especially, there has been a pretty big uptick in that. I think, of course, like there is kind of that boardroom foresight that's still done, right? Like the leaders are going to go into a room and they're going to make a decision and they're going to walk out with a plan. But increasingly, organizations are realizing, like, they have to flatten, just like we flatten the curve, they have to flatten those processes. So like, more distributed, more horizontal. And I think, sometimes it's not as, I would say, as ingrained, as processual as the Mexico City example, which actually, made it part of the process. So with these processes, they're always organic, they're always contextual. But in general, I think they are becoming more and more, plausible and more realizable for different, organizations and governments, especially, who realize it's just a way to kind of get more buy-in and actually have more validity for what they want to do.
Let's see. I was wondering how closely would this be related to risk management and when to identify potential outcomes of processes in the future?
Yeah, really good question. So a lot of times the work that I would do is closely tied to like a risk management assessment or strategic planning as a process. The biggest difference I would say is that, this is meant to often enhance those processes. So in a risk management process, and again, those vary widely, but typically you try to look at what you think are the most, plausible and probable risks or uncertainties, and you then weight them according to maybe their potential impact. And then, you maybe plan from there. And a lot of what we do is we try to really go further afield and get into what's called the possibility space. So that means dealing with the more radical potentialities. Sometimes that means engaging in things that people think are preposterous. But as I mentioned earlier, if someone thinks something is preposterous, that's great, because that's a real metric for kind of what their Overton window, as we call it, is the kind of what they think might be, possible. So I think actually it's they're kind of like brothers in arms in some ways. But just like, any good brothers, they also kind of like, like to scuffle. Yeah, so I think, on the risk management side, they'd say, oh, well, we need to be more prudent and we need to focus on this. And even something that has a quote, a long tail, we can assess it and, go from there. Whereas we kind of want to open Pandora's box on the future side and really look at the really radical stuff and think about that. And again, that means you kind of had to delve sometimes into the preposterous, but that's where the fun happens. So yeah, closely related. I'd say foresight is meant to kind of enhance those processes, but typically, again, they're all part of that longer kind of decision-making, planning, or even a policy process.
All right, that sounds good. Let's see. Another person asks, how adaptable is this framework for when what looks possible for the future changes in such a short period of time?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So, one of the interesting conversations that's really broken out now amongst the kind of community of practice that I'm involved in and researchers is, what happened, right? Like, was this not, quote, predicted? And that's kind of, predicted is sort of a dirty word in my profession. Like, we don't talk about prediction, but there's so many examples of people clearly like forecasting exactly this. And I mean, almost to a T of like a coronavirus coming out of, blah, 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 like really, right, significantly. And I mention that because I think fundamentally that that shows to me that there, these methods are really great at kind of spotting, these potential seeds of the future, these complex issues, and helping people to kind of think through them. I think now more than ever that we have to fundamentally put the onus on leadership to actually commit to those insights and those learning processes. So I do think that some of the shifts that we'll see happen or are happening now is a real kind of focus on, okay, are we doing enough to engage with people such that they feel that they want to act on it, or are we being clear about the impacts at different levels, or are we really making sure that there is a commitment to kind of see through on this? And I say that even as, you know, some of my own projects, we feel like we've done the foresight part really well, but then when it gets to the leadership and the decision making part, it kind of falls flat. And there are lots of examples of really, you know, great foresight work, or even, you know, to a step further, really good, you know, risk management assessments that clearly missed, right, the big risk, the kind of the elephant in the room. On the one hand, right, that's certainly the case. On the other hand, part of the narrative that we try to bring to this kind of work is, even if we feel like we have a really good handle on something that, you know, could emerge, or we've spotted something that's really, you know, impactful potentially, um, the world is really amazing at showing us that models are just that, right? So like, you know, like reality happens. There are events that pop up and things that emerge. And I think that's actually part of the narrative as well, is getting people to feel comfortable and open with that uncertainty. So, you know, oftentimes it's with organizations, like now I've been working with Interpol for about a year, is to make it a continuous process, right? Because it's actually meant to drive learning. So it's not just like a one-off and we're gonna shine a light on the future and then come back and just kind of keep walking, but like to make it part of that organizational learning process. So a bit of a long-winded kind of soapboxy answer, but that's sort of the, yeah, some of the stuff that's been happening now.
All right, yeah. Let's see. When did this participatory engagement process begin? How many years ago? That one's kind of open, but I'll let you take that where you want to take it.
Yeah, so you know, the one thing is that of course now like participatory futures has got a little bit of like a, you know, a brand to it. Like people are, you know, hashtagging it and it's being talked about in, you know, government circles and big organizations like NESTA. But the truth is that, you know, there's been a very clear and strong foundation of participation within futures and foresight almost since its inception. So I was really lucky last year to get a fellowship from the Robert Jungk Library in Salzburg, Austria, and they have a futures foresight foundation there as well. And I got to learn about some of the history. And in the late 1940s and 1950s, he was out talking to people about the future. He was doing these kinds of creative, and he really is one of the founders of what has become one of the core methods, the kind of the futures workshop. And so even back in the 1960s, there were these massive, you know, organizations. So the state of Hawaii ran something in the late 1960s called Hawaii 2000, and they were using cutting edge technology back in the day, so TV and telephones. And so there's always been this real interest, and again, not in all schools of foresight, but and certainly in the ones that I come from and associate with, to always engage with people and to make that part of the process, because obviously now we have the research to show that, you know, diversity not only makes us smarter and makes decisions better, but really adds a richness and depth to these processes, and it's something that we have to be, you know, attentive towards. So I think it's always been there. Some people have kind of, you know, highlighted it or diminished it depending upon their preference, but there certainly has been a long history of this. And in the report we mentioned that there really is within future studies a strong kind of dynamic of participation that's always kind of been core to its kind of, you know, foundations.
All right. Let's see. I think that is the last of the questions. So thank you again for coming, and we're going to talk about breakout groups. And we're gonna, I believe, we have time to run this game as a breakout group. So at Shy Hack Night, when we all met in person, breakout groups meant that all the people who were in the same room together would go to other smaller rooms and work on projects. So we have recreated this to the best of our ability in our Slack. To get there, you go to slackme, one word, .shyhacknight.org. That address again is slackme.shyhacknight.org. You can get in there and you can introduce yourself in the Shy Hack Night remote channel. And you can have a little bit of a socializing and then figure out what's going on. And if you have a breakout group to pitch, please pitch it in the remote channel. And look out for this link from Miro. And also, we had some other requests for links in the YouTube comments, and we will get those into the Slack as well. Katie, what am I forgetting?
I think that's about it. Yeah. If you have any questions, we'll be around to answer them in the Chai Hack Night Remote channel or wherever you want to ask your questions.
All right. And with that having been said, go forth and hack. Good night, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, guys. Bye.